Oh, reason. Did I? Hold on. And then mute this. On, crank it up. Yay, there we go. Okay, showing off. And one. Oh, that's right. And then that's sick. There we go. All right. I will, recording. Yes, or yeah, it's recording. Good. Okay, so I'll put this online tonight, so you'll have this as well. Okay, so the last of the Ps that we're talking about in the marketing of the 4 Ps is the one that we tend to be the most familiar with. Ironically, also, it is the last of the Ps that everybody looks at when they discuss and they talk about marketing, and they generally think of advertising. This is the last, and that is promotion. Now, we use the word promotion generically, and we'll talk about sales promotion as later. But what we found is that promotion by itself is just simply not enough. In about the 80s and 90s, we started to see the movement from advertising as a subject to something even more powerful in its way, and it is using the words integrated marketing communications. And it gives a more complete definition by using that, because it is the concentrated use of force. That is the whole function and purpose of promotion. Integrated marketing communication, promotion has always been one of the difficult things to talk about, because quite simply, how do we know whether it's effective or not? We hope to be able to pinpoint the consumer and be able to bring the perfect message to them and deliver to them in a way which both quantifies their needs and shows ways in which they can be satisfied. But of course, the difficulties are with it is, one, we never know quite if we're quite sure whether we're targeting correctly. We're never quite sure if we're spending enough, which is always one of their greater difficulties. And what we're hoping to do is maximize the dollars, which is just difficult. We have the difficulty of what's known as performance ambiguity, which means is this effective thing that we're doing up here, are we able to translate it, and does it work itself all the way down and affect the consumer in the ways that we wish? And so integrated marketing communication is the strategic, coordinated use of promotion to try to create one consistent message across multiple channels and develop each one of those messages based upon the medium that we're using. So the message that we would use to convey in a billboard would be the same message that hopefully we're using with television, but because of the differences between the two strata, we have to be able to craft it in a way that maximizes that delivery system. Certainly, if we're using billboard as a way of delivering the message, well, the billboard has its advantages, and those advantages come from constant interaction. The consumer going by and maximizing those 3 to 5 seconds that they have to see it. However, radio is different. Radio is not a visual medium, but radio also carries the same kind of constant interaction, but we're using words to be able to paint those things versus a visual. Hopefully, what we're doing is with each particular medium that we're using, we can take this overall holistic way in which we can reach the consumer. We get a complete vision of the consumer, who they are and where they are, and be able to deliver that message in a fashion that they can accept. So, why do we do it? Well, it's also important that we do integrated marketing communication because we want it to be integrated in a complete way, and that we're not stepping on each other's toes in each one of the mediums we're using, so we're not making mistakes. Now, we've also got new delivery systems to be able to bring the message beyond just merely the mediums. We have people now, we've had those traditionally, but now we have the rise of the influencer. But the influencer has been around for a long time. It's just we're using a different medium to be able, for the influencer to be able to reach the consumer. So, just in case anybody ever wondered how much an influencer makes, so the average influencer on YouTube, if they have 1 million customers, generally they generate just from advertising revenue, not from anything else they might sell. They generate about $65,000 per million, all right? And that's just, as I said, advertising that's just generated from people watching the YouTube channel. So let me kind of show you what that can translate into. See. So I watched this guy, Scotty Kilmer, and he is a car guy. And Scotty Kilmer's been around and I've watched him for a couple of years. Sorry. So if you notice with Scotty, he's got 6.747 million subscribers. So calculate that out, 65,000 per million. And Scotty's making about $500,000 a year, 600,000. Now, the key behind influencers is that influencers demand and require independence in order to be authentic. And so there's a fine line between being an influencer and being a shill. And the best of the influencers are those that can be able to maximize that unique benefits that they bring. So I will let you look at some of these yourself. But this is a particular guy who's no, it's not him. It's CJ Edwards. Is that it? For his name. Did I get it right? No, I didn't. I'll talk about him later. Anyway, there's influencers come and they go, but they are critical, especially for now, to be able to influence our consumers and be able to hopefully turn those, because influencers, or let's just say, especially in the last decade, authenticity has become even more valued. And so what you're going to find, especially in the future, especially with artificial intelligence coming up, and the reason to question everything we see now is going to be, how real is it? And so how do we convey that? I will say that in the next decade, that's one of the things that promotion is going to have to fix. Okay. All right. So influencers. So they foster long-term relationships because they allow the consumer to make a personal connection with them. They help to reduce and eliminate promotional redundancies. You have that concentrated use of force, and hopefully with good technology, you can target customers directly. And this is where the brave new world of AI is allegedly going to take us down. So when we talk about integrated marketing communication, we're actually going to talk about these four. So right off the bat, I'll go past the screen in a couple of seconds. This is kind of the first splash, so you see where we're going. We're going to talk about advertising. We'll also talk about that very small one that we don't talk about much, which is public relations, but in many ways it's everything. We'll talk about personal selling, which is one of the most overlooked. And as we go further and deeper with artificial intelligence, I think personal selling will be more valuable than ever. And then finally, sales promotion, which is actually advertising, but it is for a different reason. So let's talk about the original advertising. Thank you. Mostly this is I use because I'm learning how to walk again. See if I can get some squeeze room here. Thank you. Got enough room to swing a cat. Okay, so advertising. Advertising is what we consider to be the traditional way in which we interact with our consumers. Advertising in its nature tends to be one direction. It tends to be built for larger audiences, but there is room for one-on-one marketing. However, excuse me, that tends to be the purview of personal selling. Advertising includes the traditional RTF, radio, television, film. It includes print, broadcast of any kind, and it also includes direct marketing as well. But look, just think of the traditional mix of what advertising is and the single message going through mediums to mass audiences. And that's basically where advertising is. So what are we trying to do with advertising? Well, what we hope to do with advertising is we hope to be able to send clear messages to our consumers. And what that requires of us in integrated marketing communication is to have clear goals and objectives in what we're hoping to do with our advertisements. So a goal is a desire to complete in the future, but an objective is something very specific. An objective is a time-based, quantifiable goal, or I don't want to use goal and objective because it's tautological, but let's just say a conclusion. And it is time-based and it is quantified so that we can see whether or not we have achieved our goal at the end. Objectives are time-based so that they give us a measuring period and quantifiable in one way or another. Now, the quantity doesn't have to be, I want to be able to have 10,000 units sold by July. It can be, I wish to achieve a 15% market share within a year and a half. That would be an example of an objective. We want to be able to have clear goals and objectives, quite simply that because it's so difficult to be able to connect the abstract with concrete. Once again, as I talked about when we started talking about advertising and its difficulty, is knowing whether or not what we went to try to start in the first place, whether or not we've been able to achieve it. Now, the most classic model that we have when we're trying to perform good advertising is what's called the AIDA model, AIDA. Generally, good advertisement, as a rule of thumb, starts with the AIDA model, and it starts with these 4 things in a row, and that one builds on another, and on another. And so the first thing in an AIDA model that you want to do is to get the attention of the consumer. In a world of constant things going on, that can be awful difficult. I have seen something as simple as someone screaming at the screen going, "Hey," which worked for pole position, I believe, in the 82. To other and more subtle ways of doing it. But first, initially, getting the consumer's attention. Once you have their attention, trying to find a way of creating an interest. This is very difficult if the consumer does not desire whatever your particular product bringing. And so generally the interest is derived something generally a little bit broader based. And the broader based appeal starts narrowing in to create desire. So usually what happens in the AIDA model is you create this, this need situation that your particular good will fulfill, and desire comes from the creation, or let's just say for the identification of this particular need. And of course, the last one of all is the most important, which is action. It is the call for the consumer to actually do something about it. Now, the action part is always kind of difficult. This is one of the most important reasons why, especially when it comes to promotion, the ability of getting the good in the consumer's hand. This is why it is so important to do it. And this is why we give away samples as much as we can. So I think I talked about Gain in here when Gain came out. That was the same kind of thing. How do we get consumers to be able to change their perceptions about what a laundry detergent should be when generations have been using powdered detergent? We wanted to shift to a liquid detergent for lots of reasons. Liquid detergent is safer on the clothes, safer on the environment. It's easier to store, but to move the consumer to that level required great difficulty. Low-calorie beer. Did I talk about that? Same thing. How do we move the consumer's perception to where there is a reason for that? And that requires a good advertising message as well. Light beer is one of the greatest examples, and we'll talk about that when we talk about strategy. It's one of the greatest examples of how you're able to change a consumer perception almost overnight and create a whole new genre in the way that consumers consume a given product. And so attention, interest, desire, action, they are in order. It doesn't mean that you've got to create the attention first before you get the action. Many times what you'll do is you'll get the sample out there because you want to try to create the action first. Not everything follows in order. Thank you. And so, how do we come about doing promotions? Now, throwaway supply chain, I hate the word. Excuse me, I don't hate any. But I prefer demand, all right? So, we talked about the push and pull strategy. Here are the words finally coming out. And so let's look at, from the traditional mindset. Once again, this is marketing channels. So we start with the manufacturer at the top. We have specialized intermediaries and we have the consumer at the bottom because the consumer performs channel functions. That's why the consumer is in our supply chain, demand chain, please. So as I've showed before, let's go over again an example of between push and pull strategies. So in the push strategy, using the traditional chains, we have a manufacturer up here who is trying to bring a new product to market. For the lack of a better word or a better thought, let's just talk about a brand new boat to go fishing in. So what you'll find is the manufacturers will go to the Cabela's of the world. They will bring in individuals who will sell directly to the Cabela's. The Cabela's will look at that particular boat, look at their advantages and say, yes, let's buy a fleet of them. And so the manufacturer representatives here make agreements with the Cabela's here. And so the Cabela's buys those boats. And then what happens is the salespeople who work for Cabela's sell directly to the consumers, and hopefully they're able to achieve some sales that way. And so this is an example of the push strategy. And the push strategy means that you start from the top and go down. You focus promotional efforts to stimulate demand, but you do that from the structure of the top pushing down. That's the push through the supply chain, demand chain.
How do you prefer it?
Yeah, and the reason why is that I'm marketers, okay? And I have, once again, there's no disrespect to supply chainers at all. I mean, my God, without supply chain. But in a marketer, what we always consider, and I've said this again, is that as a marketer, there's only one person in our universe, it's the consumer. And no matter how well-defined a supply chain you have, if the consumer doesn't care a bit about your goods, there's no reason for your supply chain to exist. Yeah. And that's why, demand chain for me is a greater sense of what really happens. And I'm not saying, I'll just say this, thank God for great supply chain people to create efficient supply chains.
Well,
Okay.
I'm in supply chain.
Yeah.
I fully agree with you.
Yeah. Right. And see, I want to be able to expand your knowledge as well, because I can't do what you do in supply chain, but I'm real happy if you can go and talk my language to others, because that gives you an advantage. Okay. So what's the pull strategy? So the pull strategy is this. Let's change our model. Let's say we're talking about some strange little pill that I've never tried in my life. Okay. And I have these wonderful pills that really work. Not that I know anything about it. Okay. But, how do I stimulate? Boy, what an entendre. How do every word I'm coming up with is bad, so shut up. Shut up, Dave. Anyway, so how do I get this guy going? All right. So this is what I do. If I'm smart, as a manufacturer, I sell directly to the consumer. I talk about this particular item. I show him all the advantages that he has if he invests his mind, body, and soul in this. All right. And then I use the 3 golden words, consult your doctor. And the truth is that doctors generally, if a consumer asks for these specific things, they are generally going to acquiesce. So what happens in the medical tech world and the sales med world, what'll happen is they'll come in and they'll leave promotional samples. And it's the very same thing for a doctor. A doctor can just simply give the samples away And then once you've created demand that way, well, here we go with the ADA model, then what happens is the demand pulls the goods through the system. Because once the consumer said, well, he'll say a lot. Anyway, what's gonna happen is demand is stimulated. See, I'm under wreck. So anyway, that's what happens. Pull strategy, push strategy. Is one superior to the other? They work together. There's no reason not to make them both work. Just realize the push strategy is more directed towards supply chain efforts, push strategy, and the pull strategy is the stimulation of consumer demand to thrust its way through the system. All right, get those giggles out of the way. So anyway, I hope that's the last time I have to talk about it. Anyway, so there we go. So going back to advertising, let's talk about it. It is the most visible elements of the IMC. It is also those paid non-personal communications that's transmitted via the media. It is very cost efficient when it comes to a mass audience, and that is its appeal. The difficulty, of course, is that the mass audience has started to fracture. And so it's not one, or let's just say maybe it hasn't fractured, but we just have better tools at recognizing the market segmentations. There has been a definite decline in traditional media. And we have definitely moved to internet-based advertising. But in many ways, the form and structure of advertising, whether it's on YouTube or whether it is on a television, is pretty much the same way. Now, in terms of mobile advertising, we all know that to a fact. I work with a company that does a Friday night radio show for football in Mississippi. And I would say 2/3 of the people who join us during the show, 2/3 of those mobile. And definitely mobile is the way to go now, or let's just say the predominant factor, even in traditional advertising. So it is, advertising tends to be impersonal, but that's what the non-personal part is. It tends to be towards mass audiences. It is cost efficient, but it is difficult to measure how cost efficient because of performance ambiguities. And so we have to throw somewhat of the dice down to make sure that we're covering as much area as we possibly can. But as long as we will be here, we will probably have advertising in one form or another. But as I said before, here are the difficulties. There's a high expense, especially for television, in the millions. How do we know exactly how much money we should spend in order to achieve our goals? Usually this is done from some kind of past history. It's the only way we know. And even then, we are based upon best guesses. How do we evaluate the effectiveness of advertising? This is the performance ambiguity difficulty. And then we also have to look at what is permissible for advertising content. There's a Chinese advertiser who's just blowing it up on the internet right now, and I invite you to go look for him yourself. And it's funny as all get out, but that's all I can say, because it could be potentially offensive to others in some of the things he does, but he's brilliant, all right? How do I judge or gauge that is up to each individual. And so that's one of the difficulties when it comes to evaluating effectiveness, is understanding, whether or not what we're doing is permissible or even, in a polite word, inoffensive. And so these are the challenges of traditional advertisement when it is a one direction approach, one individual message. And here's the thing, we have to craft that message to make sure it is the same regardless of what medium we're using. Public relations. Now, public relations are not often talked about in marketing as an integrated marketing communication. And that does make a certain amount of sense. Public relations tends to be on company advertisements versus product advertisement. And so you will find these on like Saturday morning shows, the corporations like Archer Daniels Midland, who will talk about their use in doing soilless, or discless farming versus using the disc to plow up ground. That would be an example. You know, they have issues that tend to be for public concern, but hopefully what you're doing is developing and creating advertisements, or let's just say, what's the word I want to use? Even press releases to maintain a positive attitude. So one of the important things that public relations will do is it will do things, especially when it comes to disasters. Disasters can be more than just damage by some natural event. In the early 80s, in Chicago, they had 3 individuals die from Tylenol that was laced with cyanide. This happened over a weekend from Friday to Sunday. There were 3 confirmed deaths. And on a Sunday afternoon, Tylenol, the parent corporation for Tylenol was at a crisis, and they needed to come up with a plan. And so what happened on Monday, or for a week, Tylenol broomed the shelves of all Tylenol products in the United States. Now just think about that today. Just think about the massive amount of work that would have to be done, and it was done. They also asked consumers to bring whatever Tylenol they had in, and they would give them their money back for whatever, not even just full price for any unused portion. So they had a week that they had to find some way of being able to manage this. They never found the Tylenol killer, by the way. I mean, they had some ideas who would be. So by Friday that afternoon, the chairman of Tylenol came online, or came on television, national television, for I think it was a 2-minute commercial. And it was very well done. He said, basically, there is no way that Tylenol can replace the human lives that will have been lost in this tragic situation. However, we owe it to those people who have passed away to ensure that it never happens in that way again. And so Tylenol came up with the triple cap seal. And so it's the seal on the inside of the rim, it's the seal on the outside of the rim between the cap and the lip, and then it is a third seal on the inside. And when any of those seals are broken, you're not to use the item. And then he did one better. He said, we encourage all the manufacturers of pharmaceutical goods across the United States and the world to follow us to make sure that consumers are protected from now on. So what did he just do? What just happened? Pardon me?
He earned the public's trust.
First thing, absolutely. And the second thing, he made sure that he wasn't going to get hit for all the damage. He made every other pharmaceutical in the United States do the same thing, invest the same $60 million to do the same thing they did, which was brilliant. Okay. It was successful. That is an example of when public relations, especially with disaster recoveries, turn to the advantage. In 1991, 92, Perrier or Perrier water, which is carbonated water, naturally carbonated, had a scare because it comes from underground, and there was a scare that there was radium inside of the water itself. Now, radium occurs naturally in rock, underground, just absorb cosmic rays over centuries. Um, but Perrier waited 6 weeks before anyone even got around to considering that as a danger. And so they invested 2 months crawling along to come up with the thing that said, no, it was safe. And unfortunately, after 2 months, Perrier as a corporation ceased to exist. It was bought by Cadbury. And there's a danger if you do not respond in some way as soon as the situation demands. And so public relations, it is part of corporate affairs. It's a vitally important way, but it is one of those ways that we communicate to our consumers to say to them, we understand their concerns and we're doing something about it. So you can promote the firm, their ideas. You can also use that to have an understanding among the employees. You create a joie de vivre, a way of life, the way that this corporation is supposed to work. One of the better ones at doing this was Southwest Airlines. They had a cult following that not only existed outside the organization, but inside as well. And it is a great driver of being able to create a singular focus for your employees. And yes, it does improve brand awareness, the company brand, but it is not publicity, which is usually created to gain media attention. But what it is generally used is a way of, taking the media and promoting ideas, but it's not in the same way as publicity. So news usually feature articles. White papers are very interesting. A white paper is a thought piece. It would be an example would be on a given subject that they might consider to be some future out there. Oh gosh, was it Boston Consulting Group is a famous corporation. They're a big think tank, 2,000, 2,500 people in it. They were the ones who came up with the concept of nearshoring. They've also the ones who came up with the strategic business unit matrix. They do that thing as well. And all of these are just basic ways in which public relations expands their particular vision. Personal selling. Now, in the realm of artificial intelligence, personal selling, as I've said, and I'll insist, is going to be more and more important than ever. Absolutely. Because the further we get away from people, the greater the desire people are going to have for other people. Personal selling is a paid personal communications. It does all of the functions that an advertiser would. It informs customers about offerings. One of the advantages of personal selling is that it can overcome objections at the moment in which they are given. Personal selling is 16% of the world's gross domestic product. And it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. We have a selling concentration downstairs for undergrads. The interesting thing also about selling, if you wanted to go into sales and you wanted to get a diploma on it, you would not have to get a master's degree. As a matter of fact, they like individuals right out with their own undergraduate degrees because they'll spend the next 2 to 3 years training you on what you need to know. So they prefer undergrads actually over grads. It is a very precise form of communication, and it is the most expensive, maybe by a factor of 2.5 over any other way in which we communicate. And the reason why is quite simply is you're paying for one consumer, excuse me, for your boundary spanner in your organization to convince the consumer of the advantages of your product. One of the difficulties is that it is further away from control from the traditional advertiser. So advertising is a single crafted message, which does not change all the way through, whereas a salesperson will change that slightly, bring a little bit of difference so that it appeals to that individual at the other end in some greater and clearer fashion. Because of the expense of personal selling, you find it more suited for those particular goods that are more complex, more expensive, and carry greater risk. But having said that, I've seen, sales of automobiles without a personal salesperson either. It is the best way to be able to overcome objections, meet the consumer. The difficulty with the personal seller, however, is because they tend to be a boundary spanner in between the corporation and the consumer. There's always that difficulty of making sure that the salesperson does not extend themselves too far or too close to the consumer. But that's why we have them, okay? Very valuable, and it will always, always be valued. They have evolved, take on other elements of customer service and marketing research. We have asked the salesperson to be more than just an order taker, someone with a clipboard and taking notes. We ask that individual because they are a boundary spanner and they are the first line of defense, that they're out there doing recon as well. And so every good salesperson at the end of every day is in their office taking notes, or let's just say writing the notes on the day, and they hate that stuff. I've never met a salesperson that loved paperwork. But once again, because of that problem of performance ambiguity that we have with advertising, their frontline knowledge is valued. It's one of the most important assets in the firm. Sometimes you need to know what consumers find wrong, and you need someone just to ask. And that's what that's what a salesperson does. And so there's no equal, let's just put it that way. Especially, as I said, if it is a high-risk product that is complex, requires time to be able to understand all of its variances, personal selling is the way to go. And so advertising, okay, public relations, personal selling. I'm just going to briefly mention sales management because it's not something that you need to necessarily know. But sales management is the process by which salespeople are basically managed in the way that they create objectives for each of the individual salespeople. They are recruiters and leaders in themselves, and they evaluate the effectiveness of a sales force. And really, no more than that is what you need for the test, and that's all I care to say about sales management. Other than I teach it, and it's a great subject, but not for here, okay? So the last thing about this is that the impact of technology has meant that sales forces have reduced in size. You also find that one-on-one client relationships have kind of maintained, but team selling has now become larger as well. And by team selling, of course, it means that there's specialists within those particular salespeople. Like some salespeople are great closers that can come in and close any sale. Some are great for what is known as missionary work. All right, Viagra. Missionary work are those salespeople who go out and get new territories. That's a specialty to itself. And while it is difficult to reduce those costs, it's one of those things that is managed because without it, you just can't achieve success without good salespeople. And so we're not going to worry about how you pay salespeople. Don't worry about that. There won't be a question on that, okay? And the last to talk about is sales promotion. So sales promotion is advertising, basically. But sales promotion has a different purpose. So we talked about the difference between goals and objectives. The difference, excuse, the difference between advertising and sales promotion is somewhat the same. Sales promotion is advertisement that wishes to induce a sale within a given time frame. The goal of sales promotion is to induce trial and purchase. And though advertising is expensive, there's an enormous amount that goes into sales promotion because it's trying hard to induce that second A in the AIDA model. And so an example of this, very simple. I went online to order pizza, and the first thing I did was I looked for the deals. That's the way it's done. Now, there's also a disadvantage when it comes to sales promotion, because even with the best intentions, the problem is that we have a tendency to use them again and again, and you ask why? Well, there's a reason why. So, because of the need and the desire to push or induce sales in a given time frame, what happens is in most corporate boards is everybody lives and dies by their quotas. So let's see, this is February, March, April, May, June. So let's say we start January off and we're trying to hit our quotas and it looks like we're not going to quite make it. And so what we try to do is 5 days before the end of the month, we try to create a sales promotion, and that sales promotion pushes us over the edge. So we make the quota that month. Well, here's the problem. This little part right here, whether it's true or not, there's a very real possibility that this stuff that was pushed to the end of January was actually purchases that were going to go on in February. And so what invariably happens is you start lower the next month than you did before, and you're trying to climb up, and you get to that 5-day goal again, and guess what you do? You get the sales promotion and it pumps again. Well, here's the problem, is you get this sawtooth kind of pattern that happens traditionally, and there's the danger of sales promotions, is that sales promotion tends to be, you tend to get hooked on it, is the word, okay? And also what happens is that the consumer gets pretty, let's just say, caught up or understanding that there will always be sales promotions. And the expectation is, why should I buy anything without the sales promotion? When's the last time you bought pizza without checking the deals? That's the inherent danger of sales promotions. One other thing or purpose with sales promotion is that you're trying to change brand loyalty. And so what you're trying to get the consumer to do is just try this to see if they'll change over. And most of the research that we know is that consumers, especially those that are loyal, after they finish using the product, they'll go back to their own. So anyway, a lot of work goes into sales promotions. Is it as effective as we would hope? Not necessarily, but we're going to use sales promotions, whether they're as effective as we wish they were or not. So these are some of the most common ones. I won't mention them all, but I want you to know a couple of them. The loyalty programs, especially those in supermarkets, are the most common. A loyalty program is anything where you will get some considered discount for doing a couple of things. The big one, what makes supermarkets give you substantial discounts with loyalty programs is because they can attach demographics to your buying patterns. And that's what makes them pay off. It's one thing to know that on a Thursday afternoon, there's a substantial amount of wine being bought. But it's another thing to know if I give a 10% discount for the wine purchases, I know those individuals are between the ages of 50 and 65. They tend to make anywhere from 100 to 175,000 a year. You have a certain number of children. The gold that loyalty programs bring is they have a connection with numbers and faces to the dollar amounts. And that's why loyalty programs are so valued. By the way, most loyalty programs in supermarkets, usually the biggest discounts you get are in the butchers, the meat departments, and the delis. And the reason why is those have the highest margins. Good supermarkets cut their own meat. And because of that, that's why they can give you the substantial numbers. So my God, the price of steaks nowadays. So that's one, the loyalty programs are the ones I wanted you to know about. The other is rebates. So rebates are money that is returned to the consumer after the sale of the good. So rebates came into play in the 80s when Chrysler, Lee Iacocca was just coming out with his new K car model line, and when they were introducing this unique little hybrid idea that they called the minivan. And so these minivans that Chrysler was putting out, they were trying to come up with a couple of inducements. One of them is they had a 7-year, 70,000-mile warranty on the transmission. That was one of the inducements that they had. The other is, in that 7 category, is that they gave you a $700 rebate when you bought the vehicle. So what that meant is you bought the vehicle, you paid for it, and you got a check in the mail for $700. Has anybody done a rebate lately? Okay. So you do this with tires and you'll get a rebate back. They got a little clever with rebates now. Instead of sending you a check, they send you a gift card with the money on it because they know that you won't spend all the money on the gift card. And there's another thing about rebates. You will come in and you will buy the goods on the rebate, but 40% of the individuals who do that never fill out the paperwork for the rebate itself. So it's kind of a clever give and take. Do they work? Absolutely do they work. Yes. Do they create loyalty in consumers? I have loyalty to going to Lowe's. Well, one of the reasons it's also closer. But it does stimulate that as well, and it is relatively successful. Just remember that in every sales promotion, like everything, it comes with a cost. And some of that cost just means that the increased relationship and the greater interaction needs to be able to pay for the sales promotion. I won't worry about business or sales promotions. And we're at the end of chapter 6, okay? And so I will publish this, like tonight, just as soon as I can. I want you to check your emails just to make sure, because I'm pretty darn sure we're gonna have to do all of this online. I should have an answer for you on that online thing no later than noon tomorrow, okay? Okay, folks. It's good to see you all again. Hope you get through the next snowmageddon. And go enjoy a push or a pull.